Now, many of you might know Marc from his popular trend series that is published in the Vistage Research Center each year to help guide your decisions as you plan for the new year. Marc is the president of Optimize Inc., a Los Angeles-based management consulting firm and a 19-year Vistage member. He's known across North America as an author, speaker, and authority on strategy and strategic planning. His latest book, Momentum: How Companies Decide What to Do Next, has been featured by Yahoo Finance, Business Insider, CBS, and CNBC. Marc has developed strategic plans for over 200 organizations, including more than 100 Vistage members, and regularly contributes to the Vistage Research Center, Forbes.com, and Inc.com. So please join me in welcoming Marc Emmer. Over to you, Marc.
Thank you, Anne. Hello, everyone. I'd just like to wish you all a very happy Friday morning, wherever you might be. And I remind our viewers that in trends research, we don't look through some crystal ball. We look at facts and evidence so we can put ourselves in a position to seize the opportunities ahead. Last year in this webinar, we focused on 5 central themes facing small and medium-sized businesses: the economy, AI, climate change, rivalry with China, and geopolitical risks. And you know, the more that things change, the more they stay the same. This year we'll be talking about the economy, technology, climate change, rivalry with China, and geopolitical risks. But there will be not any partisan commentary from me on the outcome the election. I know it's been a very unsettling and contentious couple of weeks in our country, but I'm just hoping we can kind of all come together. But enough about the Dodgers and the Yankees. Let's talk some trends, shall we? I'm going to start with economic trends because I know that they are top of mind for so many of our viewers. To project into the future, we must first understand the past. Throughout 2024, much of our business narrative focused on the Fed and its ability to curb inflation. In my mind, inflation comes in 2 forms. Some of it is temporary, such as a reaction to a supply chain shock, and some of it is structural. And when we lay CPI over federal spending, it's not hard to see that the impact that stimulus has had on prices. But now that we've kind of cycled through the kind of payroll and consumer subsidies, inflation is normalizing. But I think it's very important that we all understand that we have a new baseline for inflation that is going to be higher in the future than it's been in the past. Today, I'd like to offer some good news and bad news about the economy. Our economy is more stable than it has been in some time, and we expect stable growth through the next few quarters and no recession in 2025. Personal consumption is about 70% of GDP, and consumers are spending more than at any time since 2021. So I think we can feel pretty confident about our planning into 2025. Many of us are feeling flush because the capital markets have had just an amazing run. However, I remind you that half of the S&P's gains in the first half of the year came from the Magnificent Seven stocks, which will tell you 2 things. It's really large tech that's taking advantage of the AI revolution, and most of the value creation in our economy is coming from the tech sector. Profits are expected to be about 12% higher last year, and all of this happens as many stocks are still being somewhat constrained by higher bond yields. But overall, what I think we see in our economy is excellent balance, with every sector growing next year, albeit at a slower rate. And the reason for that is because of the compounding nature of inflation, which just is making everything a little bit more expensive. But if you're looking for markets to participate in, technology and healthcare continue to outpace the other sectors within our economy. Conversely, one sector that's struggling is manufacturing. There is just too much global manufacturing capacity. Output is flat, and US manufacturers are dealing with a highly commoditized environment. 1 in 5 report that they will have to cut prices this year. A consequence of higher interest rates has been lower private company valuations. M&A deal flow is higher this year, but that has not resulted in higher EBITDA multiples, which remain unchanged. but private equity has largely been on the sideline. PE is holding on to $2.6 trillion in dry powder. That is 20% more than it was in 2021. So sellers have had to rely on strategics for their deal flow, but we do see private equity returning as the interest rate environment becomes more favorable. And we also expect to see more M&A in public companies as the Federal Trade Commission in the next administration will likely be less constraining. One of the reasons why the US capital markets are performing so well is they are considered a safe haven. Our market remains the envy of every other market in the world, including Europe, which has been somewhat flat. For purposes of comparison, Apple's enterprise value is higher than the entire GDP of Germany, and to a large extent, many of the tech companies have been constrained there. China's long-term growth has slowed to 4 or 5% amid a stock market slump, depressed real estate market, and the government has injected several trillions of dollars of stimulus in the last 60 days in an effort to revive their economy. Global GDP is expected to be about the same in 25 as it is in 24. And if you're wondering why the US numbers are lower, it's just the law of numbers, right? Our economy is much larger. The US represents 4% of the world's population and 25% of its economic output. Now, we don't provide any investment advice, but what I'll just offer here is as of last week, the S&P was trading at 24 times. That's near its historic high. And that is at a time when many of these asset classes are still competing for dollars with high bond yields. When bonds get to about 5%, they tend to arrest the performance of equities. There was some notable tariffs that were put in place in 24 and many more coming for 25, including a 100% tariff on electric vehicles from China. Imports were down slightly in 23. But I think of note, we now import more from Mexico than we do from China as companies have moved towards nearshoring. And I've been saying on this broadcast for about the 5 years that I thought what was going to happen in the global economy was that it would split into East and West. And evidence of that is if you look at the total imports from Mexico and Canada combined, that's about double what we import from China. Now, of course, the president-elect has never seen a tariff he didn't like. But what I would suggest is that, he's offered this idea of potentially a 10% import tariff across the board and 60% on Chinese goods. And he has the power to implement that unilaterally. But in his first term, even the tariffs he put in did not go into effect for 9 months. And many people think that his rhetoric is really a negotiation tactic. Also, tariffs don't really have a one-to-one effect because some of them are absorbed in lower margins and the dollar is likely to be stronger. So I really think the impact on tariffs is going to be a lot less than what is being reported in the press. Given the reset in the world order, the current trajectory is the Chinese economy will not eclipse the US economy anytime soon, or perhaps ever, although we're certainly in a rivalry with China on many other fronts, including for technological, scientific, and military supremacy. But for context, in terms of the quality of our living standard, US GDP per capita is $82,000 a year, which is 6 times what it is in China. So for now, the US economy remains the strongest economy in the world. So here are some predictions for 2025. The consensus amongst economists is they expect the economy to grow about 2% next year, with treasuries, unemployment, and inflation remaining about the same. But you know what they say about economists, the only difference between them and a coin toss is with a coin toss, you have about a 50% chance of being right. But I think the biggest variable on this slide really is the cost of energy, given that the Middle East is still a powder keg. However, I'd also note that OPEC only provides 40% of the world's oil, down from 56% in 2019, and the US has emerged as the largest producer of oil in the world. Of course, the president-elect is talking about opening up more drilling, but what I would just also say, I think in the long term, escalating energy prices is going to be a greater consideration for many businesses. Now for the bad news. I'm resharing this slide from last year with perhaps a newfound emphasis. In terms of the broader macroeconomic risks, I think it's vastly underreported that there is a population crisis that could cripple the global economy. In Korea, the situation is so dire, the state is paying couples $100,000 to have a child. We need population growth to support the nation's obligations for Social Security and Medicare. The trust fund that pays Social Security benefits will be insolvent by 2035, and the cost of Medicare is rising quickly. You don't have to be a mathematician to see that our Social Security system is built on a house of cards. So I feel very good about the US economy in the short term, but I think we also have to realize it's built on a very fragile foundation. So about the only good thing that I can say about the federal deficit is that it's very consistent. It's very consistently high. It is striking that deficit reform is not even in the conversation, but I think that's because neither party can offer the solution. Entitlements make up 61% of the budget, and given our rivalry with China and the AI race, space wars, and regional conflicts, there just isn't a big appetite in Washington to cut defense spending, which is about 13% of the budget. Now we spend more on interest than we do on defense, and 1 out of 4 revenue dollars goes towards paying interest. I want you to all imagine running a business where 1 in 4 of your revenue dollars went to paying interest. For every Fed cut of 100 basis points, that reduces the deficit by $90 billion, but the Fed just doesn't have the latitude to reduce rates too much because that would spark more inflation. Just 20 years ago, the federal debt was about 60% of GDP. By 2030, it's projected to be 120% of GDP. So proportionally, our debt has doubled in a span of just 30 years. Last year, I explained some of the pitfalls of being in a long-term debt cycle. Eventually, high debt manifests as crowding of investment and limits the ability for the government to accelerate or deaccelerate the pace of economic activity. History has proven that when these conditions persist, we see periods of low growth and high inflation followed by a collapse and a deleveraging. What happens in a deleveraging is lower access to credit, lower prices, lower wages, and that is what happened in the Great Depression. I'm not here to suggest that we're going to have a depression, but what I would say is, in order to mitigate these problems, the government may need to take draconian measures, such as massive marginal tax increases, higher capital gains, means testing for Medicare, and most certainly increasing the retirement age. And all of these things have consequences for our economy and for our quality of life. So if you're that business owner who's pondering your future and you're thinking about an exit, here's my message for you this morning. This is the time to make hay. There is going to be all kinds of opportunities in this next business cycle as the market resets. But I might be looking at the next 5 or 6 years as a window to divest. Money will be cheaper. Private equity will be driving up valuations. So this is an excellent time for us to be positioning for the future. Also, if you have any plans for any kind of exotic succession planning strategies, this might be the time to be thinking about that before the Tax Cut and Job Act rules sunset in 2026. We, of course, think that those provisions will certainly be studied by the new incoming Congress. But in my mind, all roads lead to higher inflation and higher bond yields, which is going to impact the markets and some of the business decisions that we make. And I would just say from 40,000 feet, it feels like a contradiction to me that the Fed is trying to lower rates, but most of the president-elect's policies include lowering taxes and increasing tariffs, which are potentially inflationary, and that would temper the Fed's stance. So, Anne, I'll pause here and see if we've had any questions so far.
Absolutely. Well, I have a question for you. You talked about the fact that valuations and M&A activity will be increasing. Our research shows every year that that is one of the things that our members are focused on, adding acquisitions and that inorganic growth. How can our businesses, our members, be prepared to be first out of the gate? Like, what are the leading indicators that it's time to make some of those acquisitions or investments?
Well, a few things. I would say if the members are really interested in an auction with private equity, they need to get their EBITDA up to about $5 million. That's when the private equity firms kind of come to the party. And if the private equity firms aren't at the party, then you don't have an auction, right? All you have is strategics and the values are lower. But, I think that the indicators for success in an exit are pretty much the same as just running a successful business, right? It's having diversified revenue. It's having a solid management team that's in place. It's having solid financial statements. So I think it's just doing the blocking, tackling of running a good business. And then, that's how you get maximum value when it's time to sell.
So conversely, when looking to acquire, that's what you look for in those companies as well. Strong EBITDA, strong leadership team.
100%. Although I would also say that, often your strategic buyers are looking to participate in a particular market that they have not been able to infiltrate. In my Vistage talk, I talk a lot about the need to be niche-y and own a market and command a certain market share in a market. And very often the large public companies aren't paying attention to those same markets that the Vistage members are. So that's when they can really, bring a lot of value.
Excellent. All right. Well, I can't wait to hear about technology trends.
All right. Awesome. So we will move on to technology. The technology narrative over the last few years has largely been consumed by artificial intelligence. One of the things that's emerging is the form of an AI tax. And what I mean by that is that Gartner projects that IT spending will increase 7.5% this year, with the average mid-market company spending about 3% on IT, smaller companies 4%. But undoubtedly, IT spend will be higher in the future. In this webinar last year, I offered that I thought it was a myth that AI would be replacing labor anytime soon. But I think the way to think about it is that if we invest in technology, that could slow the number of hiring and the number of people that we need to hire in the future. Several things that companies are focused on: industry-tailored cloud solutions, and also the adoption of retrieval augmentation generation, or RAGs for short, which is the technologies that companies are using to collect data for large language models. And, we're seeing some other shift in spending. Many of you have spent a lot of money in the last few years on your cloud services and infrastructure, and certainly on your cyber defense. And I think the focus more in the next couple of years are going to be in AI applications, which of course require investment in the form of some of the most expensive knowledge workers in our economy, including data scientists and edge engineers. I think the good news is now that IT is going to be powered by AI, when you call and ask for help, you may get an answer, then please turn off and turn on your computer. But we're all very aware of the relationship between Microsoft and OpenAI and others. And I think what's happening is some of the other technology companies are feeling threatened to the point that we're seeing some very unique alliances. Even Google and Meta are cooperating, which is like the Yankees borrowing players from the Red Sox. So game on. The most valuable companies in our economy are in an arms race. Amazon is embedding AI into the shopping experience. Apple is releasing new Series capabilities with Apple Intelligence. But the machine learning that's most mature in our economy today actually comes in the form of autonomous vehicles. If you saw the Cybercab release a few weeks ago, it was kind of mind-blowing, because Tesla is saying that these fully autonomous automobiles will be available in the market in the year 2026. The Cybercab will cost around $30,000, and it will be available to either courier you around town, or you can buy the car and rent it back to the rideshare services, which would be the true realization of the term pimp your ride. But, I think it's the reasoning for the car that's really, really fascinating to me. What Elon Musk is saying is we drive our cars on average 12 hours a week, which is a 7% utilization rate, which is very poor. So what we could see is less cars on the road, and then that just opens up the door for more autonomous tractors, autonomous forklifts, and all kinds of commercial applications for autonomy. And I predict that autonomous drivers will be good. Autonomous driving will also be good for marriages, because there'll be no need for your spouse to tell you what lane you should be in or where you should park your car. Now, if you think the Cybercab is out there, take a gander at Tesla's humanoid robots, which they are using to build more robots and also automobiles. Also, they'll play rock, paper, scissors with you, which is a little wild. But the chasm that's taking place here is that drones and robots will be AI enabled. But let me kind of bring this back to something that's maybe a little more relatable to our audience. If you don't feel that you are capitalizing on AI, you are not alone. Only about 1/3 companies are using AI, and knowledge workers in public companies are twice as likely to be using it as those at private companies. In its current form, AI is making a lot of mistakes, but every release of a Copilot or a ChatGPT yields substantial leaps in performance. So you have some time to catch up, but I'd say it's time to get on the bandwagon before your failure to do so could create some competitive disadvantage. 2025, the focus will be on customer centricity and personalization, which is going to be building out tools that your customers can configure on their own. And the first domino has already fallen in the form of customer service bots. Most of you have those already. But I think the story in 2025 will be tools that are even more accessible to us as we continue to see the democratization of AI. And one way we're going to see it is in the form of AI as an agent, meaning bots will not only complete part of a process, but they will complete the entire process cradle to grave. So say, for example, you wanted to book an airline ticket, or you wanted to do your new hire orientation. The bot will ensure that your criteria are met, approve the requests, and that is something that today is being done by a human. So the way I see it in the future, workflow automations are going to be a lot more plug and play. And if you look at our tech post on the Vistage Research Center in the Trend series, you'll see many examples of software products that are available and work in this way. Now, here's one that I think is very interesting that's plug and play. It's called Scribe. And what I think is fascinating about it is that it will monitor your movements on your desktop and then record a training video for you in the form of an SOP. But I'm really trying to make a broader point here, which is that most of us are using a couple of dozen of these disparate SaaS type products. Some of them we pay for, some of we don't. And I think we're headed to an entirely new phase in our use of large language models. And if you pay special attention, you're going to get like all of your Vistage dues back for the year in the form of advanced productivity if you're able to execute on what I'm about to show you in the following video, which is about utilizing custom GPTs. People think of ChatGPT as if it's one GPT, and they tend to use this interface. But what a lot of people are not leveraging is the complete OpenAI store. So if we were to click on Explore GPTs, what's unveiled is a whole myriad of various GPTs that have been pre-configured to almost any business need. So if I were to just do an alpha search, for example, for SEO tools, I would find all of these pre-configured GPTs. It's also very easy to click on create and create your own, but I've already done that. So let me share some use cases with you on various ways that you can use GPTs. So for example, I've selected a GPT called Salary Benchmarking Pro, and I've configured it to create a local compensation report for the construction industry in Los Angeles and Dallas. And once you train the GPT, it's very easy to run additional reports. So in this case, I've done so for Phoenix and Salt Lake. Here I've done a financial analysis of the technology industry, and if you wanted to do some benchmarking, all you'd have to do is upload your balance sheet and run a complete financial comparison. In this example, I created a dynamic pricing model for a local restaurant in Seattle where they could input variables such as availability, weather, day of the week, cruise lines in town, etc., and calculate what today's menu prices should be. Here I created a tool for business valuations for a landscaping business in the Arizona market. And at first, what it revealed was a set of EBITDA multiple ranges, but just by adding a little bit more detail, it did provide me with an estimated valuation. And I uploaded a safety plan, but asked ChatGPT to make it ISO 9001 compliant. In this case, I created a sales forecast for next year for an ERP provider, and the GPT even provided advice on what the revenue would be if you added another salesperson. And I created this master scheduler for an HVAC company who might want to schedule their technicians on a given day and create a route based on time and distance. Mind-blowing, right? I created all of these tools in a matter of a few minutes without any specialized knowledge or of a developer. Now, I'm not saying that the data is as good as what you may get from, say, a consulting firm, but GPTs are like custom software utilities in a box, all for $20 a month per user. And you might not even need to have a subscription for every knowledge worker, because you could have a few power users that act like your business analyst who can do some very, very tricked out things. So I think that some of these tools may replace some of the SaaS tools that we're using today that may prove to be redundant. Now, that being said, GPTs are very raw and imprecise, but given the rate of change we're seeing in AI right now, I would suspect that we will see them improve with exponential speed. So if you're just tinkering today, it's going to be critical that we do a couple things in the future. First of all, we're going to need to have very good data integrity as we start to trust AI as an agent. So right now, what I'd be doing is working on our data. Also, there are things that we should not rely on AI for. For example, any content you're creating, it's not clear if you will have any copyright protection. So I would just be very thoughtful about that. On our website, you will find an excellent white paper on how you can weave AI into your management practices. And Anne, I'll pause there and see if we've had any questions on technology.
Yeah, I think this is amazing, all the things that you can do. And I've heard that GPTs, in terms of where they get their data, or sometimes they can hallucinate. When you have something that's high stakes like that you're making big decisions on, how can you make sure that everything, you know, the data is correct? Like, how much human intervention and checking do you actually need to do?
Yeah, well, I think right now you need to do a lot of checking. Like I'm saying, it's imprecise, but I think the key is, and what a lot of novice users of GPTs don't really understand is you have to train the model. And the more you train the model, the more accurate it becomes. And, you know, you still have the opportunity to fact check things. But, you know, I think it's really excellent right now for things that are more directional. And like I said, if you want to you're going to sell your business, you're going to do a business valuation, you need to hire a business valuation firm to do that, right? But if you were just trying to get an idea of companies you were trying to acquire and what they might cost in particular geography, then something like Evaluation GPT might be useful. So, you know, I think your point's well taken. We don't want to get ahead of our skis.
Excellent. Well, we'll have more questions when we get to our Q&A session. So let's continue on to social and employment trends.
Awesome. So clearly, immigration policy is controversial. I'm not going to talk about the top politics, but I'll just say this. We did this slide of, before the election based on the Congressional Budget Office numbers. And U.S. legal migration has been somewhat stable. It's undocumented migrant numbers that have swelled. So one might think that those numbers might level off. But the other thing that I think is very important is the Citizen and Immigration Service reports that they've reached their cap for H-2B visas for the first half of 25. So they will be less of those available for us next year. As we predicted last year, housing affordability is only getting worse. The delta between what someone needs to earn and what they're actually earning to afford a house has never been higher. Also, affordable housing is certainly a noble pursuit, but it's not one that's happening very quickly. These projects take years to build. The national average is about $200,000 a unit for affordable housing, and much higher in places like California and New York. And we have a shortfall of 7.3 million housing units. To make matters worse, many of the projects are being delayed because communities are pushing back about having affordable housing in their backyard. And builders who've had to borrow money at 6% instead of 3.5% have slowed down their development of multifamily units. So a lot of those just don't pencil for them right now. And we're hoping that more of them will come back to the party next year, not to mention the sideline sellers of existing single family dwellings. So in total, we expect more building next year, and also for the market to come back. Prices are expected to be up about 4% next year. There's also no end in sight for runaway healthcare inflation. The insurance markets are generally very bad, and we are looking at an average healthcare premium increase this year of 8%, which is about the same as last year. As we reported last session, employers are putting in all kinds of mitigations to reduce their healthcare costs. 88% of employees say that medical benefits are amongst their most important benefit. 82% of their employers are providing some form of PPO, but what they're offering is certainly changing. What is killing employers today is the extraordinary adoption of GLP-1 diabetes and weight loss drugs such as Ozempic. Over 37 million Americans have diabetes, and in the last 2 years, the utilization and cost of these drugs has tripled. So as a result, companies are taking a far more affirmative role in trying to manage their costs, and especially on the pharmacy side. Some are even aligning with pharmacy benefits managers who were formerly only used by large public companies. And there's also a big movement towards biosimilars that can replace some of these medications. It's also really important for us to remember that our employees are still struggling. Since January of 2021, prices are up 20%, and wages for frontline workers are up 17%, meaning that Americans in real terms really haven't had a raise in like the last 3 years. It's only recently that wages have started to outpace inflation. Of course, last year we were talking about wage inflation a lot more. The market has clearly cooled, as evidenced by the fact that in September, the average job stayer was garnering a 4.7% wage increase, the average job switcher 6.6%, but that's the lowest premium that we have seen in the last couple of years. We had a really weak job report last month, but a lot of that had to do with the storms on the East Coast and the Boeing strike. And I'm not buying it. I don't think the labor market is going to be cooling anytime soon. And I'd also note that employee engagement scores are much lower for low-income workers who are still really feeling the pain of inflation. So it differs by compensation band, but we're going to need to remain competitive and continue to complete our compensation studies. Also, younger workers are getting bigger raises than older workers, and females are getting higher raises than their male counterparts. We are 3 years into hybrid, and our economy is still suffering from very poor employee engagement ratings. We warned in this broadcast last year that if companies brought their employees back into the office 5 days a week in an arbitrary way, that we feared that satisfaction would suffer. And we are in an employee satisfaction slump. According to Gallup, only 32% of employees are engaged at work. And I can tell you, we do a lot of employee engagement studies with Vistage members, and on average, their scores are down about 10% this year, which is very unusual for our clients. And as you've heard me say before, I think a big part of the problem is expectations. Employees have a different definition of what flexibility means than how their employees define it. 33% of companies are back in the office 5 days a week. And of them, 80% of them have a return to work policy, but only 17% of them are enforcing those policies, which has led to a narrative amongst many employees that they do not believe that these policies are being implemented equitably. We're also a less happy society that coincides with a fundamental loss of faith we have had in institutions, more mental health issues, and just a general sense that people are feeling isolated. HR technology is coming into focus as companies try to manage a very complex employment environment, and they're looking for more functionality from their HRS systems and their payroll systems. And especially the companies who are hiring younger workers are really investing in learning and development. We have some great resources available on our website at optimizeinc.net. The first is a white paper that we wrote with our friends over at Talent Trust. The second is, I think, a really interesting piece on how to manage your time in a hybrid environment. So I would suggest you might want to take a look at some of those resources. And here are some things that I would focus on in terms of the employment offer moving forward. Focus on the 3 pillars of flexibility, compensation, and career progression. But with the career progression, I think where a lot of the members are struggling is they're trying to boil the ocean and they don't have a box to elevate every person to. So what I would say is focus on your high potentials and at least make sure that you have a career plan for each one of those. I would foresee a return to more flexible benefits similar to the old cafeteria plans. And the benefit that employees are clamoring for the most is more PTO. But the big thing in this, the theme in this slide, is to have a more structured communication plan and more two-way communications. That's more regular check-ins. That's more frequent employee engagement surveys. That's more level setting on goals. And companies are organizing more in cross-functional teams so that their people feel less isolated and feel more communal kind of in their work experience. So what I can tell you, what all of our studies have showed us in the last year is that employees leave for comp, but they stay for culture. So make sure that your culture is your own. And Anne, I'll pause again and see if we have any thoughts on employment trends and social trends.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Our data from our latest Wall Street Journal Vistage Small Business Survey revealed that about 35% of small businesses are back in the office full time, but about half have some level of hybrid workers within their organization. And we asked the number of days in the office, and it was around 2 to 3. But when we asked about what the requirement was, the majority answered, like a third of those who have hybrid answered that it depends. And it depended on the department, it depended on the manager, it depended on the function. And so it felt like there wasn't really a strong policy. So while your statistics showed that 80% had a policy about returning to work, it seems like this might be a little bit of a blind spot. So what are some of the risks for not having a specific policy about working in the office, number of days required, functions that happen when you're in the office, things like that?
Yeah, well, of course, that is the answer to any question in business, right? It depends. And it's also the problem with averages, right? Because every company is different. You can't compare a production environment where they need to have people in the office 5 days a week with technology, which is way more than 50% remote. But what I would just say, Anne, is that we need to meet employees where they are and let them be the best version of themselves. So I don't think you can have like vanilla script that you try to apply to everybody, right? You really have to listen and understand what's important to the employee. If it's a single mother with two children and she needs to get her kids to school in the morning, her situation is just very, very different than a 60-year-old man who, perhaps, doesn't want to work on Fridays. Oh, and by the way, I'd like to mention that about flexible work. I think there's definitely going to be a movement towards 4 days a week. That's not going to work for everybody. But I actually think say, for example, if you're the HVAC contractor that I showed the schedule for earlier, that something like that might be really useful, and you can stagger the shifts so you have the equal number of people on Mondays and Fridays. But I think the lesson here is we just need to learn to be more flexible and not be so in our way about having to have things programmed. But we just also need to make sure that we're communicating that in a way that the employees feel that our policies are equitable.
So you think Amazon's taking a big risk in their return to office policy?
I'm saying that their employee engagement is going to go down. But everyone's weighing that against productivity, and everyone has to make their own choice. But I probably said in our webinar 3 years ago, if you side on the side of productivity, the cost that you will pay will be more turnover. So there's two sides to every story. But all right, we'll keep the train moving here, and we will move on to ecology trends. Climate change is a bit of a perfect storm, pun intended. At the Paris Accords in 2015 and multiple COPA conferences since then, the US and every other industrialized nation has made commitments to curb emissions that they have been unable to keep. The adoption of renewables is very slow, and it's hard to imagine in 2015 the scientists back then had any clue that AI, data centers, and crypto would be consuming so much of our energy, especially here in the United States. So I was intrigued when several weeks ago, Microsoft announced a 20-year pact to take all of the production from the shuttered 3 Mile Island plant, home of America's most notable nuclear disaster. And not to be outdone, Amazon and Google followed suit, and they're building something they were referring to as modular reactors. So suddenly, nuclear will be part of the electricity generation in the US into the future. And I just think it's notable that it is clear that AI is accelerating climate change. The infrastructure bill could be reversed by the new administration, but I think fundamentally where we are is we have an undersupply of cheap renewable energy, and I think our costs are going to be higher in the future. In the auto business, the last couple of years, the narrative has been about a switch to hybrid. I believe that will be short-lived. Clearly, there is a lot of range anxiety that is driving consumer decisions, but in my mind, EVs are just a superior technology than hybrid, and we'll see where the infrastructure bill goes. But as EV infrastructure is built, and it's already pretty built out in urban areas where we don't have it is in rural areas. What I think we're going to see is by the year 2032, the combination of EVs and hybrids are expected to supplant gasoline-powered vehicles in the US. Of course, where we're really feeling the pain of climate change is in the number of large-scale weather events that have ravaged the country. We had 25 $1 billion or more such events in 2023. And this year, Hurricanes Helene and Milton were devastating, both in terms of their human toll and their cost. Excuse me. Using California wildfires as a baseline, what tends to happen is when markets become unprofitable, insurers just exit, and then the state needs to become the insurer of last resort. And states like California and Florida just do not have reserves to act like an insurance company. And that leaves their residents in a situation where they have to self-insure, which just does not feel very sustainable. So I would imagine we're going to see a a rather significant restructuring of the insurance industry. I would have thought that that would have included a lot more regulation. So we'll see how the government handles that. But we may also see situations in places like Florida where people just choose not to rebuild unless there's a significant government subsidy. Many Vistage members have moved towards ESG programs in the last couple of years. Some have focused on sustainability and some the broader interpretation of environmental, social, and governance programming. And I just wanted to offer a couple of tools. The UN has this very useful website where they list their 17 sustainability goals, which a lot of members are using as a footprint for their ESG program. Also, ChatGPT is pretty nifty if you want to write an ESG program, and I'd say even more so to customize a business continuity plan once you add, some of your company's data, like how many employees you have and what software system you use and what weather events you see in your communities and those kinds of things. And on our ecology post on the Vistage Research Center, you will find a 10-step plan on how you can better embed sustainability into your strategic plan. And we will end with geopolitical risks. I think we're all acutely aware of the potential for political violence around the world and at home. Last year in this webinar, Joe Galvin asked me what I thought the biggest geopolitical risk was, and I said it was our enemies ganging up on us. I think that is exactly what is happening. You know who these companies are. They're the same. Who these countries are. They are the same countries that are taking part in various cyber attacks, and they represent an axis of evil. War is always the last resort, but it's becoming pretty clear that the current level of diplomacy and deterrence is not curbing the behavior of these bad actors. So what I think we're going to continue to see in the future is more investment in defense, more regional conflicts, flashpoints where supply chains are strained and raw materials, including raw earth elements, are scarce. Domestically, as I mentioned, the Tax Cost and Job Act will sunset in 2026, but it would not be at all surprising if Congress chose to renew that legislation. I think the Chevron deference case was super interesting. It represents a complete reset of regulation. So I think that our members would be active in their public policy advocacy. And also, we're going to have a whole new Federal Trade Commission, and that is going to change a lot in terms of M&A for public companies and potentially lots of other things. For example, we may see a reversal of their recent ruling where they found all non-compete agreements to be illegal. But what we have been seeing as a result of the FTC action over the last few years is the behavior of public companies has been more vertical integration. Now, I'm really sorry about this eye chart, but it's kind of the point. This is how the pharmacy part of the US healthcare industry has rolled up. So what we see is the insurers, the PBMs, and the specialty companies have all integrated under one roof. So I think the lesson there is that as industries mature, this is the behavior of public companies. So now I think going forward, we'll see both the vertical integration and the horizontal integration. So here are some takeaways from my presentation this morning. We're going to see more cooperation and alliances. By my house, there are 4 builders who are competitors who have aligned, and they went through the land use process together. We'll see more recombining. Those are combining disparate business models and morphing them in a new way. So for example, if you go get a T-Mobile account, they'll try to sell you Hulu, or if you have a Walmart Plus account, they'll bundle in Paramount. And also I used to have an investment advisor who said you can't catch a falling dagger, meaning you never know what the bottom is. And I'm afraid that after the next year or so, interest rates could rise again. So this would be an excellent time to be locking in our financing. And finally, I think we need to think differently about strategy. You can't just be downloading forms and making a list of SWOT. That's not going to cut it in this environment. Strategy needs to be a continuous process. We need to think about strategy as if it's an event, and we need to be doing real market analysis and environmental scans, such as the content on this webinar this morning. So I hope this information has been informative to you in that way. So to summarize, with the help of this AI-generated image, there's a window for business owners to build enterprise value over the next 5 to 7 years, and private equity should be more active in the market and driving up valuations during this next round of the business cycle. During that time, our economy should be stable, growing at a moderate pace, and we may have some temporary relief on corporate taxes. I think that things like the job report and the CPI will fluctuate, but we just have to remember we're in a long-term debt cycle, which will be marked by higher inflation, higher debt, higher bond yields, which will impact the markets and strain our Social Security system. And on a personal note, I'm going to be looking like this guy with the cane very soon, so that's very troubling to me. So, as Walter Cronkite used to say, and that's the way it is, I will leave you with this thought. The trends I've shared this morning are both meant to be optimistic and realistic. I believe the fears of AI replacing us are completely overstated, and I believe AI will improve our life in ways that we can't imagine. And what I would also say is, if you want to fear an exponential threat, the threat you should fear is the government running out of money, because that's what's going to happen if our leaders can't figure out a way to negotiate with one another. We should not run our businesses based on fear. We should run our businesses based on facts. We prepare for the things we can control, so we're in a better position to react to the things that we can't control. I'm Marc Emmer, and I wish you all a happy and prosperous 2025 and beyond. Thank you, Ann.
Thank you so much, Mark. Appreciate your insights. A lot of these are in your series that's in the Vistage Research Center now, if you want to go deeper, and there's some charts there. And of course, we have his slides available for you. So we have about 10 minutes for questions. Some of them you have already answered through the course of your presentation. But let's start with going back to the opportunity with GPTs. We have a question from Ryan. Are you using a GPT to interpret financials? I know that's
Yes, absolutely. I'd say that's a powerful use of GTP. So I actually showed an example where, because one thing you can do is maybe you remove all of your company information if you're worried about security or whatever, which some people are, by the way. But yeah, you can easily upload your P&L or your balance sheet against any industry. And not only will it show you the benchmarks, but we'll also do an analysis and show you where your financial risks are, or maybe where you might not be on point. And again, I think 3 to 6 months from now, these tools are going to be even a lot more powerful than they are now. So now's the time to get started.
Yes, I think that was some of the commentary in our chat. So that, if you're going to be really late if you're not getting started now. I think you've mentioned $20 a month, but definitely important to not use the free version and turn off learning, correct? Is that the guidance, so that when you're uploading your financials that it stays secure?
Yeah, well, I'm not an expert on the security, but what I would tell you is you are going to have, I believe it's called a plus license, in order to access the custom GTPs. But you can very easily click on upper left-hand corner, will tell you what your license is. And then it should say explore GPTs, and then you'll know you'll have access to them.
Okay, excellent. Now, coming back to some of our economic challenges, Chris Noonan asks, are there any trends regarding tax bites and notably property tax bumps?
I'm sorry, can you say that again, Ann?
Any trends regarding tax bites, so the amount of money that might be deducted from income or profits in the form of taxes, and specifically property taxes, and how they're taking more of a chunk of money.
Yeah. Well, impossible to know what the new Congress will do. We don't even know what the Congress is. But similar to what I was saying earlier, I think a lot of people think that, we have a new administration and things are going to change on January 20th. And a lot of these things like tax policies will take 2 or 3 years to even take hold. But I'll tell you what, I'd be in front of my tax professional a lot in the next year because we're probably going to have it about as good as we will ever have it if you're a business owner in the next couple of years. But I probably couldn't comment beyond that.
Okay. All right, we have a question that all of us are wondering, not just the older folks, but Catherine Haight asked if we should consider drawing Social Security early since the fund might run out.
Right. Well, I didn't mean to imply that the fund was going to run out. I said that the reserves they have are running out. So, they're going to have to take some action to, ensure that we all get paid our Social Security. I think the people my age, I don't think we're in much trouble. I worry about the next generation because they're going to have to re-engineer the entire program. I am not a financial professional, so I would ask your certified financial professional that question. But what I will tell you is, I think the economics for most people are going to be better waiting to age 70 to take your Social Security than taking it early. So, of course, that a lot depends in terms of what you think your lifespan will be and so on. But I would probably gear that question towards a financial planning person.
Okay, excellent. Let's come back to employee engagement. And that's a very hot topic, something that we're covering in our upcoming productivity report. Jaron Vanderhoff asks, are there any stats showing different levels of engagement for companies with 100% in-office policies versus a very flexible hybrid policy?
Yeah, 100%. So there's a direct correlation to how often you have people in the office and how engaged they are. So more in the office, less engaged. But where I think that is dicey for employers is, even though on average, to your point earlier, they're only in the office 3 days a week, people are less engaged than they were before. So it's not just that people, because a lot of people do want to come to the office with a purpose. They want to know when they come into the office, there's a reason for them being there because, that single mother with 2 children, she had to get up, she had to get them dressed, she had to get them to school, she had to get to the office. It's very hectic for her. So she's probably more than happy to come in the office. She just wants the flexibility to leave at 3 o'clock, right? So it's about creating an environment where, because we all know, we've all learned this through hybrid, you want to do the most important things in person. You want to do your strategy meetings in person. Maybe you want to do your one-to-one with your manager in person. But so that's what we do in that perfect calendar that I offered earlier, is we kind of lay out a whole schedule for, maybe you orchestrate it. So Tuesdays is KPI day and one-to-one day, and Wednesday is departmental meeting day. And you craft a schedule so that the important work can be done face-to-face in the office, but everyone still has the flexibility to live their best life. I also wanted to answer one other thing about the previous caller about asking about Social Security. A lot of the females on the line today want to know, no, I am not the guy that was on The Golden Bachelor.
Oh, well, that takes care of the next question.
Okay, good.
Okay. Julie Bradley Rowan asks, again, on the topic of engagement, any tips or the best way to actually measure employee engagement? Are those surveys? Are they interviews? What are you finding most effective?
Yes. So what we recommend as a best practice is the deep dive employee engagement study once a year. I don't love the public contest ones because what happens is you can't really change the questions. They don't give you very, very useful segmentation, and everyone's fudging the number because they want to win the contest. So you should not do it yourself. You should hire a third party to do it so that you can get more meaningful feedback. And also, it's very important you play back the feedback to your team. So these were our scores. This is what it meant. And this is what we're doing about it. And that needs to be a continuous conversation during the year so that the next time you do the study, your employees are more incented to participate. Then that needs to be supplemented with a lot of companies going towards a quarterly pulse, or some are, they're getting these services where they'll ask one question once a month. And I think that's fine, but it doesn't take the place of doing the deep dive analytics where you can really get the data and the segmentation. And then, in addition, what we learned during the pandemic is the importance of one-to-one feedback, right? So I think it's doing the surveys and doing the pulses, but it's also meeting in smaller teams and meeting one-to-one with our managers so that there's a constant two-way feedback loop so employees really feel like they're part of the solution for their employer.
Excellent. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for questions this morning. Thank you so much, Marc, for your insights today. I know our community values your deep dive and your takeaways and your recommendations. So thank you so much for being here this morning.
And thank you, Anne, for your leadership. I think the Vistage Research Center is such an important part of the fabric of our community so that our members are in a position to make information based on data and not just on conjecture. So thank you, Anne. Appreciate you so much.